This is who we are. Let's pray.
Amen. Well, good morning. Life is hard. Would you agree? Life can be really hard. This is not new information to you, right? Everyone is privy to this because of all of our shared experiences. And each of us walk with a limp of sorts, if we were honest, because we carry with us the aches and pains of living in a broken world. The question this morning is not, are you hurting? The question is, where does it hurt? Where does it hurt this morning? Where do you carry with you pain? Maybe for some of you, it's actually in your body. You have been carrying around in your body pain. And it's the simple things that you never thought about. Walking, picking things up, travel, exercise, sleep, that have now become obstacles in your day. And you often think about the times you did them without pain or reservation, and you realize you took those moments for granted. Maybe for you, it is in your body, but it's an illness. It is something you'd hope by now you'd be feeling better from or would have gone away. And at first, you clearly noticed that something was feeling off, but now as time has gone on, you've just adjusted your life to the illness, and you've just gotten used to being sick. It has become your new normal. Maybe your limp this morning is not something physical, but rather something in your mind. You've come this morning riddled with anxiety or depression. And though it's not something you carry on your body, it affects you daily. And you have no answers. You have no reasoning why. You just find yourself in the middle of it. Maybe the limp is one that's been inflicted on you. Maybe it is something that somebody has said to you, or a broken relationship, or just some ache and pain from something there. And so your limp may look like shame or guilt or broken trust. Words or actions done to you in the past that you carry with you everywhere you go and into every relationship you have. Maybe your limp exists outside of you completely. Maybe it's somebody that you love, a son or a daughter or a loved one, a friend, who continually brings hurt and pain in their life and by way of extension brings it into yours. Maybe for you it's somebody you love, somebody you lost, somebody who is lost. And so your pain this morning and the hurt that you feel is for somebody that you love. Wherever you are hurting this morning, I want to acknowledge it. I want to speak to that hurt if I could this morning. This morning, we'll be looking at a tale of two daughters, both in need of healing, both encountering Jesus. We've entitled this series, Behold, Sing the Beauty of Jesus. And the whole purpose of this series is just to tell incredible stories about Jesus and let you just simply look at him, behold him, and make up in your own mind who you think he is for you. And so today, we are finishing this series as we get ready to go into Easter next week. And if I can be completely honest, when I was preparing this series for our church, this was the first story that came to mind and the last one I wanted to preach. The first story that came to mind and the last one that I wanted to preach. Now, although this story is filled with beauty and wonder, it is also filled with a lot of questions and tears. Spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about healing today. And before we dive into these waters, I know that there are people in the room right now who have prayed for healing that didn't come. And I realize that as we endeavor into this story, that pain might rise up to the surface again. And so I want to begin by acknowledging those stories. But this morning, we hold in our hand this mysterious tension. It is the mystery of healing. And so before we jump into our story, I think it's important that we lay some theological groundwork for the story on which this, for the reality in which this story builds. The first fundamental truth we must know is that God heals. Now, I realize when I say that, all sorts of different things may come into your mind about healing. For some of you, you're my skeptics. You have this murmur of suspicion in your heart. Oh, great. Here we go, this guy, right? What might be entering in your mind is that in your worldview, there is no place for healing or miracles. Everything has a logical, reasonable explanation behind it. And so for you, you think, I don't think so. Maybe for you, it's the groan of disappointment. Maybe you have gotten caught in the YouTube trap of some crazy Pentecostal preachers and kind of the healing there. Don't worry, I'm not going to be selling any handkerchiefs to you guys today or special salts or anything of that nature. But your perception of healing is a little bit skewed. Like it's about to get weird in here and I'm not excited about it. Take a deep breath. It's not, I promise. And for other views, it's a sigh of relief. People in here have been waiting. Come on, let's go. Let's get weird. Let's get this healing thing going. Some of you, that might be you here this morning. Wherever you find yourself, here's what's absolutely clear in the scriptures. God heals. He does. There's just no way around it. What's clear in our world today is that God heals. There's no way around it. But there is a caveat. He does heal, but not always. The reality that we live in is not everybody is healed. We all know stories where we've asked for healing and healing didn't come. And many have tried their best to determine why some healings happen and why others don't. But if we survey the scriptures, here's what's absolutely clear. There's no formula for healing. There's no process specific to healing. Every single healing is different, and it comes in a mysterious and beautiful way. It happens or it doesn't. There is no kind of rhyme or reason behind it. I love what Bethany Allen says. She says this: there is no formula for healing. There is no one-size-fits-all situation, which means if we're going to get anywhere in our understanding and experiencing of this gift, which we understand to be given to us by the Holy Spirit, then we're going to have to move from how and why to what. What is healing like? And I think this is the best question that we ought to ask. Not how do we get to it or why doesn't it happen, because there is no clear indication in the scriptures of those realities, but more what healing is like. And since there's no formula and we know this is a gift for us to experience, what is it like to go through healing? And healing has 4 fundamental stages. It begins in the place of longing. This is the desire to be healed. This is the desperate cry of an individual to be healed. And this is where all healing begins, in the stage of longing. Then is the stage of encounter. And this is where our hurts meet the healing hands of God. And God pushes back the darkness in our bodies and brings healing and restoration. That the darkness encounters light and the darkness could not overcome it. Then there's the stage of waiting, our favorite stage, right? And this is the stage where we wait on the Lord for healing. And last is a stage of wonder. That when God's healing hands touch something, it leaves wonder behind in its path. What on earth did we just experience? What just happened? And so I've told these stories before, but I think it's important to share them again. There was a few years ago, like 5-6 years ago now, I was on a pastoral staff, and I was low man on the totem pole, which meant I got to do all the things that none of the other pastors wanted to do, which namely included hospital visits. The reason being is because hospital visits are always really, really hard. You're not walking into somebody's best day, you're walking into their worst. I'll never forget, I stepped into the room where this 17-year-old girl with a chronic illness was sick again. And this time it wasn't looking good. I functionally walked into the room right after the doctor had given the news that if things didn't change in about 48 hours, to start making arrangements. And I sat there with the mother who had just seemed like she had been kind of preparing for this moment for some time, but still riddled with grief, and a friend who could not comprehend the words she just heard. And so we prayed for this young woman, asking God to heal her body. A couple of days later, I get a phone call from the mom saying they have been discharged from the hospital, that things have radically turned around and she's on her way home. And a few weeks after that, I saw her walk into a Sunday service and we worshiped the Lord together. God heals. There's nothing that I did. Trust me. God heals. The next story was a story of a father who was doing some yard work. And he had some plants that he really loved. And he had this neighbor who annoyingly never cleaned his gutters. And so when he didn't clean his gutters, the gutter overspill would come on and land onto his plants and was destroying his plants. And so one day, kind of out of spite, he climbed up the ladder to clear out the gutters to be like, hey man, do your job kind of a thing. Well, tragically and unexpectedly, he slipped from the ladder and fell on his head and entered into a coma. I got that call too. I showed up at the hospital and met with the family, and we prayed the very same prayers with the very same kind of desperation. And a couple days later, he passed away, and there I was, worshiping the Lord with a grieving mother and a grieving daughter as they longed for the man they loved. There is no formula for healing. In one story, we are surrounded with wonder and awe and how and why and what. And the other one, we are filled with the same questions, how and why and what. But one thing is certain. God was present with both individuals. One was healed, just one was not. And so I just want to leave that before us in mystery, because we're uncomfortable with mystery, if we're honest. That's not good news for you. You're not like, oh, great, now I can go tell all my friends the good news that some people are healed and some people aren't, you know. But this is the essence of the biblical faith, is that there is mystery behind it. And so I didn't want to teach this message that is filled with wonder and healing without first acknowledging the mystery. Now let's jump into our story. Verse 21. When Jesus had again crossed over by the boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him. And while he was by the lake, then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came. And when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He earnestly pleaded with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her, that she will be healed and live." And so Jesus went with him, and a large crowd followed and pressed around him. So at this point in Jesus' ministry, he's basically a celebrity. Everywhere he goes, there are crowds waiting for him. Paparazzi, if you will, waiting to talk to him, ask him questions, get healing, whatever. And so Jesus had just left this place, went to the other side of the river. There he met a demon-possessed man, where he casted out the demons out of his body, healed that man, went to the other side of the boat, and there's still the crowd waiting for him there. You talk about a busy schedule, Jesus had one. And so there he is, surrounded by this crowd. In the midst of the crowd, this man emerges forth, and we get his name. His name is Jairus. Now, Jairus is a synagogue leader, which means in layman's terms, he works for the church. And he works pretty high up. You see, Jairus is one of the leaders there in the local congregation. And so he has esteem, he has wealth, he has notoriety, and more importantly, he has a very public relationship with God. Now, if you've been following in the scriptures any of the time, are the people who work in the synagogues big fans of Jesus? No. Why? Because Jesus is fundamentally turning their system on its head. He's saying, you have heard it said, but I say to you. He's like, all those pastors and preachers you're hearing every Sunday, here's what they're saying to you. But here's what I say to you. And fundamentally change the teaching that they had given their lives over to. And so it's easy for us when we read the scriptures to just kind of like read this business as usual. But I think it's really important for us to put ourselves in the shoes of Jairus. Jairus had given every minute of his life to God. Dedicated his life to it. His schooling, his studies, his finances, everything that he had went to God. Went to serving and giving himself over to the church. But heartache enters his life when his 12-year-old daughter falls ill. And this is only a pain a parent knows. And it's the pain of your child in pain. My wife has this great saying. She always says, our kids are our hearts walking outside of our bodies. And if you're a parent, you know that's the case. That's what your kids are like. And Jairus' heart is bleeding because his daughter is in pain. Many of you know last year, our family went through some hardship as our youngest Judah fell, which was a normal, regular, everyday kid fall, but for him it wasn't. We had a couple of stints in the hospital, and it was pretty scary times. And I'll never forget holding my son in a particular moment when he wasn't doing so well. And there's this guttural prayer that you pray of, God, please. That only if you've been in that place, you know that prayer. Only if you're a parent, you've been in that place and you know that prayer. And this was Jairus' prayer. as he was holding his daughter in his arms and seeing her slipping away. A man who his whole life had had power and control and influence had no say what was happening in the life of his daughter. And so Jairus at that moment was existing between guilt and grief. Guilt because he realized not many people were as lucky as him. People in his church had lost their kids much younger, and he had had 12 incredible years with his daughter, but grief because 12 years is not long enough. I need more. And this is where Jairus is in this moment, filled with grief and pain and fear and insecurity and unsure of what will happen next. His emotions a mighty river, and the dam holding them back about to break. And he falls before Jesus' feet. And I'm sure he had a reasonable thing planned. Hey, Jesus, I know you're busy, but if you don't mind, I have this situation with my daughter. I'd really love to come and see her. If you had some time, you can fit in your schedule. But when he sees Jesus, this well of emotion boiling with him breaks the dam. He just falls at Jesus' feet and begins to please come see my daughter. She's sick. I need you to heal her. Now, don't forget who Jairus is and what his position is. In doing this, he's functionally resigning from his job. You think that it's cool for a synagogue leader to go and ask Jesus, the very rebel rabbi who all of the other Pharisees are working against, to come and heal his daughter? But desperate times call for desperate measures, and Jairus needs a miracle. So it doesn't matter. He's willing to risk it all in order to have his baby girl healed. So he falls at the feet of Jesus, weeping. And Jesus goes. And this has been a reoccurring theme for us in our series, and I hope it's been meaningful to you. It's this: wherever Jesus is invited, he shows up. I've said this multiple times. And in your journey, in your quest of wherever you are with Jesus, just invite him into your world, and I promise you, he will show up. He will meet you where you are. And that crowd is still following Jesus, and they're following him wherever he goes. And the story continues. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. And she had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all that she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. And when she heard about Jesus, she came up behind the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, then I'll be healed. Here we find a woman at her last hope. You see, in the middle of this intense moment for Jairus, there's an interruption. Jairus is kind of bringing Jesus to the crowd. Come and see my daughter. Come and see my daughter. And there in the midst of this crowd is this woman. Now, the scriptures tell us that she was subject to bleeding for 12 years. Now, there's confusion about what exactly this means. Was it some menstrual issues, or was it hemorrhaging? Either way, this sickness not just only had physical implications, but social ones too. Why? Because a woman with this condition was unable to be around other God-fearing Jews. Because in doing so, they believed that she would defile them, make them impure, not able to go into worship at the temple. And so not only did this woman have to wrestle with her illness, but she had to wrestle alone, outside of community, felt rejected from God and the people who represented him. And so this illness not only had loneliness attached to it, but also things like infertility and a whole list of other bodily struggles with it. And so she sees Jesus, and she says, this is my shot. This is my opportunity to be healed. You see, for her, there were no solutions. She went to doctors after doctor's office, filled out constantly all of those stinking forms over and over and over, hoping that at this office, maybe it'll work out. And every single time, the people who were supposed to know what was going on had no idea. And not only has she spent time in doctor's offices and with all these different examinations, but in addition, she spent every single dollar she had. Every experimental surgery, every possible medication, every single way she could think to heal this disease, she spent every dollar she had, and now she was broke with no answers and no hope. And this is where we find her. And the text tells us here, in all of her endeavoring to get better, she only grew worse. Put yourself in her shoes for a moment. Maybe you've worn her shoes for a moment. You know the kind of desperation that she's coming with. And so when she sees Jesus, this man she's heard who can heal, she thinks in her mind, if I could just touch him, I'm sure something would happen. And there's this crowd swarming around him. Jesus over here, Jesus over here, Jesus over here. And Jairus is dragging him through the crowd like, come and see my daughter. And she says, this is my opportunity. This is my chance. I better go for it. Now, what's important to realize in both of these stories is both Jairus and this woman are at a different place in life. Jairus, wealthy, wise, influential, well-known. This woman is an outcast, broke, but both are losing hope. Both are at the end of their ropes. Both of them come to Jesus with the ashes of their life in their hands, saying, can you do something with what has been burned, with what has been ruined? And both of them are longing for healing. And so look what happens next, verse 29. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. And at once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him, and he turned around in the crowd and asked, who touched my clothes? You see the people crowding against you, his disciples answered, and yet you ask, who touched me? But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet with trembling and fear and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. So there's this crowd swarming around Jesus. Jesus over here, Jesus over there. And this woman just gets close enough just to touch his end of his robe. And when she does, she feels something happening in her body. And suddenly she knows for the very first time, it's healed. And you could see the rest of the crowd moving forward, and she just standing still, realizing what has just taken place. But suddenly the crowd stops because Jesus stops, and he turns and asks a question saying, who touched me? I love how dense the disciples are because we are the same, right? There's this crowd pulling and rioting at Jesus, and Jesus is like, who touched me? Who touched you? That guy, that guy, that guy, that lady, that dog, that cat. All these people touched you. What do you mean who touched you? But Jesus was looking for something more. He was looking for the one who touched him, and when he felt the power go out, to have a connection with her. Why? And this is what's so important, is because Jesus desires to heal the whole person. Jesus is not just some miracle maker. He's a God who longs to heal the entire person. And so more than just healing this woman's illness, Jesus wanted to heal her heart too. And he wanted her to know that her stepping out and reaching out for him, this declaration of faith was seen and acknowledged, and God had healed her because of that response. And so he's looking around, looking for the eyes of the one who touched him. No, who touched me? Then the woman realizes, busted. I just got caught. And so she fesses up and comes before Jesus. Now, why is this such a big deal? Well, Jesus is a rabbi. He's a teacher. He's a leader in the synagogue. He's a righteous man. And in touching him, according to Jewish customs, she had defiled Jesus, made him unworthy to touch, or unworthy to go into the temple and to worship. Except the Jewish understanding of holiness was this: you couldn't come within anywhere of something that's considered defiled, because it would defile you. It would taint your holiness. It would defile your holiness. But Jesus was so holy that when defiled things touched him, they became holy. And it flipped this whole paradigm on its head. And so we see here that this woman is freaking out because she thinks Jesus is mad. Who touched me? Meaning, who has just defiled me? And so she comes before Jesus broken. It was me. I did it. And the scripture tells us she told him the whole truth. Told him about the illness, told him about the sickness, told him about what all that meant, told him that in touching her and touching Jesus, what she had just done. And she's expecting Jesus to get really upset and really angry and really tell her, but instead, Jesus stoops to her level and he says, daughter, your faith has healed you. Notice how he speaks to her. He speaks to her that of a father speaks to a child. This woman, outcasted, lonely, desperate, longing for healing, sees Jesus, looks him in his eyes, and he sets her free. Jesus longed to heal her all the way. And so he does. So in this woman, we see her go from longing. We see her go to encounter when she touched the rug. We see her waiting to see it all healed in her body, and all the waiting she had done before, all those years of dealing with the blood issue for 12 years. And then we see Jesus push back the darkness in her. And it leaves her in wonder. Look what he did. But the story doesn't end there. It continues, verse 35. And while Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? You can hear the inward groan of Jairus release. Maybe he's thinking, if it hadn't been for this interruption, maybe we could have got there in time. I mean, think about Jairus. He's pulling Jesus through the crowd, and Jesus is like, hey, who touched me? He's like, who touched you? Everybody, let's go. There's no time for this. We got to move. And he's like, no, I got to find the person who touched me. And he speaks to this woman. He says, your faith is healed. That's fantastic. But we got to go, right? There's an emergency happening here. Come on. And suddenly someone taps Jairus on the shoulder, and he realizes it's somebody from his house, and their face is stained with tears. And his worst nightmare is coming true. And the words he never imagined would be uttered from somebody's mouth hit his ears. Your daughter is dead. Don't bother him anymore. And you could feel Jairus' heart drop through the floor as he's living his nightmare. You could imagine the questions he begins to ask in his mind. Why not me? Why her? She was only 12. She had no opportunity to live. Why not me? You can feel the frustration as he's saying, I've given my whole life to you. I've done everything right. I've served in the temple. I've given all my money. I've studied and given everything to you. And this is how you pay me back? Why? And he was too late. Jairus missed his miracle. And as a father, I'm sure he's gutting himself alive. Because he's like, if I could only got here faster, I could have went to the other side of the lake. I could have tried to find him sooner. I could have done something more. And slowly, Jairus' world is crumbling into the sea. But then the words of Jesus. Overhearing what they had just told Jairus, Jesus told him, don't be afraid, just believe. Don't be afraid. This is my worst fear. Believe it's already over. But even in this moment, Jesus demands faith. He requires it. Looks Jairus in the eye and says, look, man, I know you're hearing the worst news of your life, but hear me in this. Don't be afraid. Just believe. Believe in me. Death doesn't get the final word. Jesus does. Even for the life of the believer, the death does not get the final word, but Jesus does. Because of who Jesus is and what he's able to do, even the dead rise. And not just now, but in the future. There are those of you who have prayed this very same prayer and wanted the same thing. And the hope of next week, Easter Sunday, the resurrection, is that because Jesus lives, we will live too. And that though the limp you may carry with you this morning is the limp of death, because of who Jesus is, death does not get the final word. He speaks to the grave, and people come alive. And the hope of resurrection is that when the King comes with all of his kingdom, the dead will rise. And we will be together with him. Now, Jairus is in the stage of waiting. Can we be honest? Waiting stinks. We hate it in all of its forms. When YouTube is buffering, when there's a long line at Starbucks, right? Anywhere we are, waiting feels like it stinks. And often, we wish God worked at our pace. I sure do, don't you? Like, Lord, hurry up. We got things to do. And Jesus is just completely unconcerned with our timetables. As much as we dislike waiting, waiting is necessary for maturity. I mean, think about the biblical story. Think about Abraham. God comes to him as a slightly older man and says, you're going to have a kid. And then has to wait decades until his wife in her 90s bears him a child. Right? 50s, you're like, I don't know. 60s, I don't know. 70s, there's no way. 80s, 90s, yeah, right. I love what it says of Romans about Abraham. It said that Abraham was so old, he was as good as dead. That's old, right? That's what they're saying. And it's at that moment, he becomes a father. You know, imagine graduation, you know? He's pulling up to there at that. He waited. It's all throughout the biblical narrative that all these biblical figures are waiting. Because God moves at his own pace. You see, if God was someone we made up in our minds, you figure he'd move a lot faster. But because he's his own being and has his own will and his own timetable, he moves at his own pace. And so Jairus has to wait. Now, I want you to imagine Jairus as him and Jesus are walking towards his house. He's doing everything that he possibly can to not let his heart fail him. The biblical authors have this phrase, do not lose heart. It's this image, this picture of you succumbing to the circumstances and situations around you. When you lose something, do you do it on purpose? Of course not, right? When you're looking for your keys and someone asks you the last question, well, where was the last place you put it? If I knew, I wouldn't be looking for my keys, right? If I remembered the last place, I didn't mean to lose it. Losing happens by accident. But what doesn't happen by accident is taking. And the biblical authors say, take heart. Hang on to courage. Reach for it. It's easy to lose it. It happens by accident, but what takes necessity and intention is taking. And this is what Jesus is telling Jairus in this moment. Don't be afraid. Take heart. Grab courage. Reach out for it and hold on with dear life because it's not over yet. And so the whole way Jairus is moving towards his house, he's clinging to those words of Jesus. Do not be afraid, just believe. Do not be afraid, just believe. Do not be afraid, just believe. And they make their way to the house. Verse 37. He, being Jesus, did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. And he went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. And he put them all out. And he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and they went into where the child was. So Jesus tells this crowd, time to get lost. And he gets his few disciples, Peter, James, and John, and he grabs them and Jairus. He says, let's go to where your daughter is. And they go there. Now imagine being Jairus, and you're turning down the road to your house. You pull up into the driveway, and you see all your family and friends outside. And they're weeping. And they're mourning. And everything within you is realizing you've just pulled up to your worst fear. But the words of Jesus are ringing in your head. Do not be afraid, just believe. And you step out of the car door and you're walking through and you're seeing loved ones' eyes as they look at you, mourning. And you hold onto the words of Jesus. Now Jesus shows up and everybody out there is weeping. He's like, why is everyone crying? Now, there's some times where Jesus seems, at the very least, inappropriate, right? It's like Jesus shows up to the scene, is like, why is everybody crying? And they're like, what? What do you mean, why are we crying? They're baffled. They're astounded. Imagine Jesus stepping into a hospital room after they just pronounced an individual dead, and he's like, what's the big deal? Why is everyone crying? And then he says, she's not dead. She's just asleep. And the text tells us that everybody there laughed. And it wasn't like a laugh that was so funny, stand-up skit, It was laugh out of absurdity. What? Well, there was no other response other than nervous, awkward laughter. What just came out of his mouth? What did he just say? Again, it seems at the very least inappropriate. Asleep, they just pronounced her dead. But Jesus was seeing the future that was about to come, not the present situation that they were in. And so it's easy for us to be like super spiritual and be like, oh, I wouldn't have laughed. I would have believed Jesus right in the get-go. But we do this all the time. We laugh at the things that we think God would have done in our lives that become a reality today. And so often the Lord baffles us in the way that he moves. And so laughter is a pretty normal response to the things that Jesus is saying. And so they show up in the midst of this mourning. And then Jesus kicks everybody out. He says, everybody's got to leave now. Why? Because Jesus needs the people in the room who are going to believe that he has the power to do what he's about to do. He gets rid of the people who mock and laugh and who doubt. In verse 41, he took her by the hand and he said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. And immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. And she was 12 years old, and at this they were completely astonished. And he gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this. And he told them to give her something to eat. So I love this image. Jesus walks into the room. He sees where they've laid the little girl. And he stoops down to her level, and he takes her by the hand. This beautiful gesture of a father caring for a child. And it gets to her, and not with all this fluff and frill, and lightning didn't shoot down from heaven, and he didn't start to levitate or anything like that. He just says, hey, little girl, it's time to wake up. It's time to get up. And she does. She sits up, and you could feel her parents freaking out, right? As would be a normal response. And she gets up, and she just starts walking around, starts playing, starts doing whatever. I'm hungry, whatever, and her parents are just, can't move, can't breathe, can't speak. What just happened? And Jesus says, hey guys, I just keep this between us. What? My daughter just rose from the grave. What? Keep this between us? I can't. Because Jesus is not interested in building hype around his ministry. He's interested in meeting the needs of people. And so he meets those parents' needs, and he does the miraculous. And so Jairus went from this place of longing to encounter, to waiting, and now wonder. What just happened? What did I just experience? And I love Jesus' words. Hey, get her something to eat. She's probably pretty hungry, being dead and all. And I could just see the dad making a PB&J, just stunned, not even know what to do. Hand it to her. Thanks, Dad. You left the crust on. He's like, it's shaking. What? And she's just back to normal, walking around. And Jesus and his disciples make their way out of the house, and he's like, hey guys, just keep this between us. Isn't that incredible? That for Jesus, though this was miraculous, for Jesus this was normal. Why? Because for him, it was the fruit of the kingdom he came to bring. Jesus was never surprised at what he was able to do under the power of the Spirit, being God, because this is what he came to do. When he first ever preached his first sermon in the synagogue, this is what he said he would do. And he's doing it. And his disciples get lit on it. Jairus and his wife get in on it. And it's this beautiful thing. This morning, at Zion, we believe that God heals. And I know that there are those of you in the room this morning who have come with a limp. Something's aching. Something's hurting. You're needing something healed. And right now we want to enter a time of response where we create space for God to do exactly that. Look, this isn't a guarantee that it'll happen, but this is what Jesus told us to do. And we want to be faithful to that. Obedience to the scripture is for us to pray for healing and ask God to do that very work. And so we believe that there are those in the room this morning who are longing for healing. Maybe for you, that healing's in your body. We want to pray for you. Maybe that this morning you need healing for an illness. We want to pray for you. I sense that there's people in the room right now who need healing from sin done against them or sin that they've done themselves that has brought pain, ache, and just grieving into their life. We want to pray for you. I also sense in the room this morning that there are people right now really riddled with anxiety and depression. We want to pray for you. There are those who are carrying in their person, in their mind, harmful memories, words spoken, traumatic things that have happened in the past. And we want to pray for you that God would heal those areas. It's been keeping you from something. It's been keeping you from moving forward. It's been keeping you from all that God has been longing to do in and through you. And we want to pray for you. We fundamentally believe that God is not done working. That His Spirit is still alive and well and speaking and breathing on people. And we can't guarantee that it's going to happen, but we're going to pray like it will. We're going to ask God to do it. We don't want to be a church who just talks about healing. We want to be a church who prays for people to be healed. As one of the greats, John Wimber, says, we want to do the stuff, the Jesus stuff. And that's our heart here at Zion. And so the story hit a few of you in different places. And wherever it hits you today, we just want to come alongside you and stand with the work that God is doing in you. And pray for the very areas God is moving in your life. Where does it hurt for you this morning? It would be our joy to pray with you. So we're going to have a team of people available up here to pray for you, and it would be our joy to do so. We're going to enter into a time of just worship. And so maybe for you, you don't feel a limp this morning, but you're going to see people coming up and getting prayed for. I want to ask you to stand in the gap on their behalf and to pray that God would heal them where they are from where you are, asking that God would just meet them in a powerful and beautiful way. Would you stand with me? I've titled this morning's sermon, Beauty from Ashes, because this is what Jesus does. He takes the things that have been ruined and broken and scarred, and when you have a pile of ashes, it means it's been burned to the ground. And Jesus takes those very things and He breathes life onto them. And the very things that were destructive and harmful and broken and ruined, when Jesus breathes on them, become life and beauty and hope. And we believe this is what He wants to do this morning. That He longs to bring beauty from ashes, joy from your mourning, praise for the very areas that are heavy in your heart right now. So we're not going anywhere. We're just going to linger here for a little while. We're going to worship. We're going to pray. And if God's been meeting with you, respond. Respond to His word. Come, Holy Spirit. We invite you into the room to do what only you can do. We believe, Jesus, you still heal today. And we ask for a mighty outpouring of your Spirit here and now as we gather and worship and pray. Come, Holy Spirit, be with your people.
See